GIT 500, Instrument Construction. As we talked about in the previous presentation, that document that collects the data, whether it's a survey or a list of your interview questions or an observation checklist, that is called a data collection instrument. And it is vital to construct that instrument the correct way in order to collect good data. All data collection attempts must include a cover letter. It's an introduction that should include your name, your affiliation, what college are you with or what company are you doing this research for, what you are doing and why you're doing it, any information about the survey, interview, or observation, whatever you're using to gather your data. You should include this in the email you send out asking for participation, and if you're using a survey, at the top of the survey as well. If you remember back to the ethics presentation, we talked about informed consent. So this is getting informed consent. You need to completely inform any potential participants of the details about your research and about the survey or the interview or whatever you're doing itself. Again, this is a must do. In a cover letter for any kind of data collection instrument, you want to, again, introduce yourself, describe your main objective, explain how this is relevant to the study, give any basic instructions that you need to give as far as how to fill out the survey, if it's a survey. Explain that the study is voluntary and anonymous, unless you're doing medical research where you're following people, or longitudinal research where you're following people, you're not going to be getting their names. You need to provide your contact information, and if you're doing research under the supervision of university faculty, you need to give their name and contact information as well. Give them a deadline by which you would like them to return the survey, and thank them for participating. So here's an example. My name is Julie Karn. There's her name. She says she's working on her master's degree at Arizona State University. You can be more specific if you wanted to see a graphic information technology master's degree. She says, I am studying the effects of social media on sales of automobiles at car dealership. That's her main objective. So she says that. She talks about the relevance as far as the results and what they could do in helping car dealerships create more effective social media campaigns. So that's our first 3 bullet points over here. And then basic instructions, please complete the survey below, and then explaining that the study is voluntary and anonymous. Your participation in the study is voluntary, and you have the right not to complete the survey or stop the survey at any time. Of course, you would adjust that based on how you were gathering your data if you weren't giving a survey. And then you also want to include that the answers are completely anonymous. And then you would provide that contact information, give a deadline, and thank them for participating. Sweet and simple. This should be on any email soliciting participation and on the top of every survey. And again, I know we talked about these multiple times. Open-ended, that's where the participants write down their own words. Closed is where you give predetermined responses that they pick. Let's talk about writing good questions. The first thing is use everyday language that people will understand. Here's an example. If you have an item on your survey with the question of, do you believe the semantic web concept best defines how the web works? That may be fine, but if your participants don't know what you mean by semantic web concept, You either need to find a more common word, or you can define the term and then ask the question. You shouldn't ask very wide-ranging, open-ended questions. Why do you attend college? You will get a zillion answers on that. Maybe that's what you want, but it creates more work for you. Any closed questions should have an option for everyone. So if you ask them, do you attend class regular? Yes or no? They might want to say maybe or sometimes, right? So you need to make sure everybody has an option to answer and not force them into yes or no if that's not what they want to answer. And then don't ask double-barreled questions. Those are questions within questions, or double questions like this one. How often and how long have you used Adobe Photoshop? So that's 2 questions. So you can ask both questions, but you need to ask them separately. Be sure not to ask leading questions such as Adobe applications are too expensive, correct? You are leading them to that answer. This is a very biased question or item here. And don't ask questions based on your presumptions. So a question like, how many classes did you skip last month? That assumes they skipped classes, right? And that's biased. Closed questions typically use attitudinal scales in formatting the questions that are in a survey. There are 2 purposes of these attitudinal scales. It's to measure the intensity of the participants' attitudes towards a situation or issues or whatever you want to ask them about. And it also provides techniques to combine those attitudes towards different aspects into one overall indicator. It's sometimes difficult to develop attitudinal scales for survey items. You have to know what aspects or issues that should be included when trying to measure an attitude towards an issue or problem. You have to decide the procedure that you'll use for combining different aspects to get an overall picture. And then this is the big one, you need to ensure that the scale is measuring what it's supposed to measure. There are different types of scales. There's the summated rating scale, the equal appearing interval scale, and the cumulative scales. And those are the names of them. Likert or Likert, depends on who you talk to, Thurston and Gutman. We're mostly going to be talking about the Likert scale. The summated scale, also known as the Likert scale, is based on the assumption that each statement or possible answer, has equal attitudinal value. The thing to remember is with Likert's questions, they are always about agreeing or disagreeing about something. Thurston. Shit. Okay. You can also have what we call Likert-like scales, which are not about disagreeing or agreeing. They are structured very similarly and give a scale. So here we have how easy is it to use Adobe Illustrator, and it goes from very easy to not easy at all. When making Likert or Likert-like scales, you either give categories on the range. Here, the example is strongly agree to strongly disagree. Or you use numbers for ratings. And in the example on the right, Premiere Pro is the best video editing software. 5 is strongly agree. 1 is strongly disagree. And you can actually put them in a reverse order, whatever makes sense to you. But you always want to have an odd number of selections. You should always have a neutral or an uncertain or not sure in the middle. And usually you see 5 or 7 point scales most commonly. When you're using a rating, you want a positive statement. That positive answer will have the highest point. And what I mean by that, if you say the website is easy to navigate and strongly agree because it is a positive comment or statement, strongly agree will have the highest number. If it is a negative statement, the negative answer will have the highest point value. So if you say the website is not easy to navigate, you see strongly agree has the highest point value. Now this is not that important for the level of this course, but if you end up doing an applied project or something that does have a lot of statistics, this comes into play. Using what I showed you in the previous slide of positive and negative statements and rating points, values, you can calculate those Likert scales in more in-depth attitudinal score results that we're not going to go over in this class. But if you want to know more about Likert scales, as well as the other 2 types of attitudinal scales, the Thurston and the Gutman, you can find more information on those in chapter 10 of the textbook. So when you're creating your instrument, you want to create questions that will directly answer one or more of your research objectives or questions. You need to make sure that any question in there really relates directly to your objectives. Demographics are a little different, but every other question should be specific to one or more of your objectives or questions. So make sure your objectives are written clearly and correctly. For each objectives, you can write down a list of questions that will help answer them. And then for each of those questions, list the information that you'll need to be able to answer those questions. And then this is when you'll formulate the survey or interview questions to get that information that you need to answer your research questions. And here's a really good piece of advice is when you're writing your survey questions, be sure to number each of them, because when you go to write up your research results, you're going to probably need to refer back to the survey questions or interview questions. Let's build an instrument. We're going to construct an instrument, and we're going to do a survey to get results for this research objective. Determine GIT students' favorite movie superheroes. First, we want to get some demographic information. Number 1, remember I said number your questions. Are you a current GIT student? Yes, no, and other. If you remember, I said before that you should always, in closed questions like this, give everybody an option they can answer. Because perhaps they are not GIT students, but they have a focus area in GIT. We want to know that. And then we would ask their age. You can see here I have groups of ages, and they're sort of arbitrary, but there's some logic to this. The first one is under 18. And the reason why I have the under 18 is because if you remember from the ethics training, people under the age of 18 are minors, and they are a protected class, and then you have to get parents' consent, informed consent, in addition to the child. And so this is a good way if you're like, yeah, I don't want to include minors, you still need to ask. You still need to give them an option to answer, because if you give the survey and you don't have that first available option of under 18, and you have someone that is 16 or 17 who wants to take the survey, they don't have something they can answer, right? So they will say 18, and so then you're data is not exactly correct. If you have an option that they can answer, you can then take their data out of your data results. You can identify that and get that out. And then I just did some logical breaks, and you can see it goes from 18 to 29 and then 30 to 39. It doesn't go 29 to 39, or it doesn't go 30, 18 to 30 and 30 to 40. You don't want to have two categories with the same number in it. So if B was 18 to 30 and then C was 30 to 39, what do your 30-year-olds pick, right? So make sure you don't have any overlap. And then just like the under 18, you need to include an over. So wherever you want to stop your age brackets, it's totally fine, but then you need an over the top number for those people. Even if you don't want to include them in your results, even that are not part of your target population, that will help you take that data out, because you don't always know who's going to take your survey. All right, so you would need to find out if they are fans of superheroes. Are you fans of any movie superheroes? Yes, no, other. Again, give them an option. Give them that C. They can write in whatever they want. Then you might ask if they prefer DC Comics or Marvel Comics or something else. You'd want to find out precisely which superheroes, and you may want them to be able to check as many boxes as they want. You would use check boxes for that in your survey instead of radio buttons. And if I was really doing this, I would have a lot more. This is just an example, but again, I give them an other option. And then you might want to say, of those, which is your favorite? And again, other option. This one I would say pick one, right? The top one, pick as many as you want, but the favorite, pick one. And so now you know who they like, but not really why they look like them. And this is where you want to use your open-ended questions. This is how you can find out the why. So what characteristics do you admire most about your favorite superhero? They fill in, write their own answer. And why do you prefer your favorite superhero, right? So we have some quantitative data. This is our qualitative data. And we have a good instrument there. Other concerns are, again, be sure to number each question so that you can refer to them easily when you're writing up your research. Order them logically. Usually you want to start with demographic information. You could also have gender, age, even where they live, what state they live in, stuff like that. If it makes sense. Typically age and gender is asked. Age specifically so that you can keep out minors. It's a good idea to pre-test the instrument for understanding, and that just means show it to somebody that's not going to take the survey, maybe a roommate or a husband or boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, and say, did these questions make sense? So if they don't, you can rewrite them. And then again, make sure each of those questions apply to one or more of your research objectives or questions. Don't ask questions just because you're curious. And then be sure to include that cover letter introduction at the top of any survey, and then any email that goes out asking for participation, or posting in Facebook, or however you are gathering your participants. So what we talked about here is that it's really important to write good survey questions to get good data, and that attitudinal skills are used to measure participants' attitudes and what they think about things, but also sometimes how much they use things, and then demographic information. And we use both Likert and Likert-like scales. And, you just need to make sure that you use the proper way to construct a survey or list of questions. And again, make sure you number them because that's very helpful.